What's growing on, gardeners? July has begun, and believe it or not, now is the time of year where seed starting begins to ramp back up again. That's why on today's video, I'm going to share with you 10 veggies that nearly every gardener can plant in July right now.
If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and hit the bell to receive new video notifications, and check out our Amazon store and Spreadshop links in the video description for everything I use in my garden and awesome custom designed apparel and other gear. Your support is greatly appreciated.
As a point of reference, I live on the southeastern coast of North Carolina, Zone 8B. So keep that in mind as we move forward when I'm giving these seed starting recommendations. However, July is a pretty long month, so at some point in July, almost all gardeners will be able to start these seeds. So if you're south of me, maybe you'll need to start these things in the latter half of July. If you're north of me, maybe you will need to start these things in the former half of July when it's still really early. That way you can beat the frost. So please keep my location in mind and scale it to your timeline accordingly. Veggies 1 and 2 that you should be planting in July are cucumbers and your summer squashes like zucchini. It is a tremendous mistake that gardeners try to keep their initial plantings of cucumbers and zucchini alive all season. Your summer squashes like zucchinis and your cucumbers generally only have a lifespan of about 2 to 3 months after transplant, and our growing seasons tend to be a whole lot longer than that, even locations with short growing seasons. So surprisingly, my initial zucchini plants look fantastic for the time of year that we're in, but they are starting to slow down and quit on me. And while I still have some really good looking cucumber plants, I'm starting to have some pests bore into them. Some of the vines have had to be cut back to nothing and probably can't be saved. I'm starting to get a little bit of disease on some of them. You're starting to see some of the vines wilt. And again, these are my initial plantings of cucumbers and zucchini from the beginning of April. So they're tired at this time. There is no reason to keep them alive all throughout the season. Don't fight nature, just replace these plants. Now in the business, we call this succession planting. It is a terrible mistake to try and keep these short-lived plants alive all throughout the growing season. So you should be trying to replace the plants with new seedlings roughly every 6 to 8 weeks or so. So even if you live in a very short season climate, you should probably be growing 2 to 3 crops of cucumbers and zucchinis. If you live in a long season climate, you may need to grow 4 to 6 crops throughout the course of the spring, summer, and fall. I usually average about 4 crops of cucumbers and zucchini. I just started fresh batches of cucumbers and zucchini 2.5 days ago, and they are already breaking the surface. I'm seeing one here, one here, one here. That is how quickly your cucurbits, like your cucumbers and zucchini, germinate. So please, if you haven't started a new crop, do it now. Make fresh transplants. They will be ready for transplanting out into your garden in 3 or so weeks, and you'll probably be harvesting them in only about 45 to 60 days. Crop number 3 that you should be starting from seed in July are your small fruited melons. Now, melons are also part of the cucurbit family, same as cucumbers and zucchini and other types of squashes. So they have a very rapid germination rate of only about 3 to 4 days, and they are ready for transplant in only about 3 weeks after germination. Now, whereas large fruited melons like watermelons can take all season to grow because the fruit is huge and you really only get 1 or 2 shots to plant them, smaller fruited melons can fruit very quickly. Some of these small fruited melons fruit as quickly as 45 to 60 days after transplant, and that is what you see right here. You see a wide variety of small fruited melons that I have trellised up this cattle panel, and these plants, well, they not only fruit quickly, but they begin dying back quickly as well. They have shorter lifespans. They burn that candle very rapidly. So we don't want to try and keep these alive all season long. Eventually, these vines are going to quit on us, and they are just easier to replace. Now, there are some incredible small fruited melons out there, and when I say small fruited, I mean melons that usually weigh about 1 pound or less. These are great options for not just short season climates, but for long season climates where there's a lot of disease and pest pressure, because they grow and mature and fruit very quickly, so you can just keep replacing the plants. Things like the lemon drop watermelon, we have things like the Kajari melon, we have these small individually portioned honey rock cantaloupes. These are all fantastic options, and I'd recommend them all for successive planting throughout the season season, as well as for cooler short season climates that have trouble growing things like watermelon because you need a lot of heat and a long growing season for them to mature and ripen. Crop number 4 are winter storage squashes. These are varieties of squash that store for long periods of time, 2, 3, 4 months or more. And the goal is to plant these later into the season. That way the fruit matures a couple of weeks before your last frost when your garage or your basement has cooled down sufficiently. Because if you harvest them before frost, they will store for the maximum lifespan. Now here where I live, I struggle to grow very large winter squashes like pumpkins or other squashes that get several pounds in size because we have issues with vine borers, with cabbage moths, with squash bugs. It's really tough here, as well as a lot of heat and humidity. However, a couple that work out well for me are your bush butternut squashes and smaller winter storage squashes like this red curry right here. Because this red curry squash is so small, I can get a harvest off of it before the pests and the diseases attack the vines, and things like your butternut squashes are often immune or at least resistant to vine borers. So things like this I like to plant now. That way the plants can grow throughout late summer and into early fall, and I can get a harvest of them in the mid-fall and then store them in my garage where they can last 3 to 5 months. Crop number 5 that gardeners should be starting from seed in July are fall tomatoes. And this holds true for almost all gardeners, even in locations where the tomatoes that you planted back in spring survive all the way until frost. Let me explain. It should come as no surprise to gardeners that live in the Southeast, the Deep South, Florida, Texas, California, and other areas of the country with very hot summers and long growing seasons that growing a fall tomato crop is a no-brainer. That is a great way to extend the growing season deep into the fall, maybe even early winter, because here in our hot, humid, wet climates, a lot of times the summer heat is too intense and it kills our original spring planting of tomatoes. But what about growers that live in the Northeast or the Midwest or the Pacific Northwest, where the summers aren't persistently hot enough to kill all of your tomatoes, and when frost comes in late September, October, maybe even early November, your plants are still hanging on? Well, the reason why you should still start a fall tomato crop is because even if your plants don't outwardly die from the conditions of the summer, they will still be tired. They will be covered in disease, they will be attacked by insects, they will be shaggy and ragged looking. They just won't look great come the end of the season, and their production will be pretty lousy. So if you go the extra mile and you start yourself a fall tomato crop, that is a great way to get a final harvest to store and can for the long winter, and pick a whole bunch of green tomatoes that you can then keep in your garage or your basement and bring them upstairs a couple at a time to ripen on your countertop, and you can have some amount of ripened tomatoes throughout the late fall and early winter to extend your harvest. Now, for the overwhelming majority of us, we begin losing day length and warmth rapidly once we start entering September. So for that reason, you're working against the clock when it comes to growing fall tomatoes instead of working with the clock during the spring, where it warms and your day length gets longer and longer. So you really need to be several weeks ahead of the game to account for the cooling temperatures and the shortening days. So for that reason, I recommend that most growers grow determinate style tomatoes and not indeterminate style tomatoes, because determinates, they tend to ripen their crop a lot more quickly than indeterminates. And if you grow an indeterminate beefsteak, you'll probably wind up with a whole bunch of small malformed tomatoes come the end of your growing season. Don't make that mistake. I will be growing this heat tolerant variety called Red Snapper, which did great for me this year. I like starting these heat-tolerant varieties of determinate tomatoes because when they go in the ground, it is still going to be very hot and humid. So I need something disease-resistant, but because these are an F1 hybrid determinate, they will ripen fairly quickly and efficiently. If you don't want to grow a determinate variety and you want to grow something indeterminate, you will probably want a short-season cherry variety. I don't think you'll have a lot of luck with indeterminate, larger fruited varieties of tomatoes unless you live somewhere that is very warm deep into the winter, like Central or South Florida, South Texas, Southern California, maybe the Phoenix area, etc. For growers north of me, I recommend you focus specifically on early season determinate varieties like Selects, Legend, or Early Girl. Go for varieties of determinate tomatoes that are less than 60 days to maturity. Crop number 6 is one of my absolute favorite low-maintenance fall crops out there, and that is a fall planting of potatoes. Potatoes are one of the easiest fall crops that you can grow, and fall is the perfect time to grow a second crop of potatoes. The weather is just perfect. And what you see right here are my spring planting of potatoes that I harvested a few weeks ago. I've been eating them for several weeks now. I've mostly eaten the best potatoes in the whole lot. And some of the potatoes that you see in this lot are a little bit inferior. They're already starting to sprout, or they have a little bit of greening on them, and you don't really want to eat very green potatoes. So those are perfect to repurpose as seed potatoes for another fall planting. So not only are they low maintenance, very easy to grow, and they grow perfect in the fall, but if you repurpose your old spring potatoes, you have everything you need to grow potatoes for practically free. And of course, potatoes are fantastic winter storage crops. When cured and stored properly, they can stay fresh for many months. Crop number 7 that is perfect for planting in July is corn. Corn is one of the few plants out there that can actually take the extreme heat and the sun. So it is typical to grow corn as long as you can all throughout the spring, summer, and into the fall. Typically, most people will plant their first crop of corn after last frost and then harvest it into the early to midsummer. Then they will plant another crop of corn either in late spring or early summer for a fall harvest. And for many of us, the very beginning of July is the perfect opportunity. Now, one of the things that you may want to look at for your fall corn is one that has a fairly low days to maturity. Don't grow corn that takes 90, 95, 100 days to maturity, because remember, we are working against the calendar. We are starting to lose daylight. So our days get shorter and shorter. The temperatures will get cooler and cooler. So early varieties of corn are going to do better for a fall planting. Veggie number 8 that is perfect to plant in fall are string beans. Now, string beans are one of those crops that are very easy to grow, but they don't do well in extreme heat. They tend to yellow, and the beans get really tough and wood-like, and they don't taste really good. So here in the southeast, we grow our first crop immediately after last frost. We harvest them all throughout May into early June. Then it gets really, really hot, and it will destroy your initial crop if you haven't harvested it. Well, a good time to plant another planting is going to be at some point in July, depending on your climate. That way it can grow throughout August as it starts to slowly cool down, and you want these available for harvest probably in September, maybe early to mid-October. So this is, again, something that makes great for fall planting. It's usually low days to maturity, so they handle the shortening days of the fall pretty well, and they're absolutely delicious when harvested in fall. Veggie number 9 that is perfect for planting in July are your warm season lettuces. Now, all lettuces do not like the same conditions. There's a lot of variability in different types of lettuces. For example, your very heavily ruffled and curled leaf lettuces and your red leaf lettuces, they like very cool temperatures. They want it to be downright chilly, and they handle hard frost and freeze very well. So those are lettuces that are often grown in the fall, winter, and early spring. But your romaine lettuces, especially your heat-tolerant varieties like this giant Caesar right here, they don't like any frost at all. In fact, even a light frost can damage your romaine lettuce. They like warmer temperatures. Now, here in July where I live, it is way too hot to grow any type of lettuce. Even the most heat-tolerant of your romaine varieties is going to struggle. It's going to bolt. It's going to taste very bitter. But now is a great time to start your transplants indoors. So for me here in the coastal southeast, I will start my romaine transplants indoors where it is cool and temperature regulated come the end of July. That way I can plant them out into my garden in the beginning, middle of September, because they will take 6 to 8 weeks to germinate and turn into nice transplants. Come around September 15th, it will finally be cooling off enough that I can plant my romaine lettuces out into my garden. I may have to put a little bit of shade cloth over them if it's still a little bit hot, but then they will grow grow through the late September and early October weather, and they will grow very nice heads before it frosts come the middle of November. That's usually when we get our first frost. So timing is very important when it comes to growing your lettuces. For the overwhelming majority of people, July is a good time to indoor sow your romaine lettuces in a controlled environment. And crop number 10 that is perfect for planting in July isn't really a crop, it's more a category, and that is flowers. As gardeners, we are constantly thinking about all of the edibles that we can plant out into our gardens, but we can't forget all of the pollinators and other support species that work so hard for us and our garden, and they need flowers to survive. And the fact of the matter is, now that heat stress is at absolute peak, and most of the flowering of our fruit trees and things like that, the native plants, are long behind us in the spring, there is a minimal amount of flowers out in the garden, despite the fact that the insect population is growing and growing. So we really need to support those good insects that really thrive and need flowers so we don't get overwhelmed by the bad insects. So my initial planting of sunflowers is looking pretty pathetic right now. They are all dying back. So it is very important that I plant new flowers out into my garden. And some of the favorites that I like growing are sunflowers, nasturtiums, and sweet alyssum. I'm going to direct sow all of these right now. We're going to plant some sunflower seeds about an inch deep, some nasturtium seeds about an inch deep, and we are going to sprinkle some sweet alyssum and then water them in, and they will germinate in a matter of a week or two. We really want to get progressive waves of flowers throughout our garden at all times to support those beneficial insects that thrive on flowers. You are by no means obligated to plant the exact flowers I planted in this video. Plant any flowers your heart desires, anything you like that will also support your native pollinator species. Now, I do see some gardeners recommend things like starting carrots and brassicas and peas this time of year, but I really disagree with that largely, and I think it's too early for most gardeners unless you live in only the absolute shortest of growing seasons. For the overwhelming majority of gardeners that don't see frost until October or November, it is probably way too early to start those plants because they are all very sensitive to heat. I would rather start my brassicas and peas a little late than a little bit early, because although your broccoli and cauliflower heads and your pea pods will take damage in a hard frost, you can cover them. And as long as you cover them with an agricultural fabric, if it's going to frost or freeze, they will generally be fine, especially in the early to mid-fall when the freezes aren't so severe. But because those plants are so intolerant of heat, temperatures above 70 to 75 degrees really do a lot of damage to them. If you plant them out too early, the heat can literally destroy your entire crop. So it's much easier in the cases of these plants to protect them against the cold than it is to protect them against the heat. As for things like carrots, the sweetness of a carrot is proportional to the coolness. So the cooler the weather, the higher the sugar content. The hotter the weather, the starchier they will be. So carrots are extremely tolerant of cold. So you definitely don't want to rush them out into the garden because you don't want them forming roots when it is still relatively warm out. Otherwise, you will wind up with a starchy, not very sweet carrot. That is my opinion. That's why I'm not going to recommend all of those plants until August. But again, you know your own climate best. You may be an exception to this rule if you have extremely mild summers or you have very early winters. So don't take everything I say as gospel. Again, I'm in zone 8B. I'm just giving you a rough idea of what I do this time of year and why I think the way I think. And that right there are 10 crops the overwhelming majority of gardeners can start from seed in July. I know it's really hot right now and the heat may have some of us down and not in the gardening mood, but I promise you, if you start these crops, once it cools down in the fall, you will be so happy you did because you will still have a beautiful garden growing on. So everybody, I sure hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and please ring that notification bell so you're notified when I release more videos like these. If you're curious about any of the products that I use in real life in my garden, I will place links to all of them down in the video description in my Amazon storefront. So expand the video description, click on the Amazon link, and you'll see everything I use in my garden in real life. And while you're down there, please check out my spread shop for custom merch if you want to support the channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see all of you again on the next video. Boy, oh boy, is it a hot and sunny day. I wonder where my best boy Dale is. Oh, there he is. Dale, you are a smart boy, you know that? I think you found yourself a little shady spot, haven't you? Dale, do you want to go inside? It's getting a little hot. Come on, I'll take you inside. It is clear that you are done with your fun in the sun for the day. Let's go inside and cool off, Mr. Handsome Pants.